Pope Francis unleashes a historic attack on the Trump administration over its cruel treatment of migrants, and takes specific aim at remarks made by J.D. Vence, a Catholic convert. So-called Christians in the MAGA movement are melting down over this. The Pope, head of the Catholic Church, issued a rebuke of Donald Trump's mass deportation plan, stating that it removes the migrants of their inherent dignity as people and will end badly. Usually one to abstain from commenting directly on the internal politics of individual countries, Francis made his new remarks in a letter addressing U.S. bishops. In it, he invoked the Bible's book of Exodus and said that God is always close, incarnate, migrant and refugee, and pointed out that Jesus Christ was expelled from his own land, when his family fled to Egypt and had to take refuge in a society and a culture foreign to his own. Putting fake Christians to shame, Pope Francis went on to state that Jesus loved everyone with a universal love and taught us to see the dignity of every human being without exception. Thus, all the Christian faithful and people of goodwill are called upon to consider the legitimacy of norms and public policies in the light of the dignity of the person and his or her fundamental rights, not vice versa, the Pope wrote. He then turned his pen towards addressing the United States directly. I have followed closely the major crisis that is taking place in the United States with the initiation of a program of mass deportations, wrote Pope Francis. The rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tacitly or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality, he continued. At the same time, one must recognize the right of a nation to defend itself and keep communities safe from those who have committed violent or serious crimes while in the country or prior to arrival. That said, the act of deporting people who in many cases have left their own land for reasons of extreme poverty, insecurity, exploitation, persecution, or serious deterioration of the environment damages the dignity of many men and women and of entire families, and places them in a state of particular vulnerability and defenselessness, wrote the Pope. It was the next part of the letter that has really infuriated MAGA supporters. Recently, Vice President J.D. Vence, who was baptized and confirmed into the Catholic Church in 2019, attacked the Church's compassionate teachings on immigration, proving that he either doesn't understand Catholic theology or would prefer to cherry-pick what he likes and doesn't. Vance butchered a medieval concept known as Ordo Amoris, or the Order of Love. As an American leader, but also just as an American citizen, your compassion belongs first to your fellow citizens, Vance told Fox News. That doesn't mean you hate people from outside of your own borders, but there's this old school concept, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then, after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. Of course, the idea that one should love those closest to you doesn't mean that you shouldn't love people from other countries. Vance shamelessly twisted the meaning to suit his party's xenophobic views. St. Augustine, who pioneered the concept that Vance was referencing, certainly didn't advocate for an authoritarian mass migration program. In his letter, Pope Francis wrote that Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups, a direct and blunt rebuke of Vance's claims. In other words, the human person is not a mere individual, relatively expansive, with some philanthropic feelings, the Pope continued. The human person is a subject with dignity, who, through the constitutive relationship with all, especially with the poorest, can gradually mature in his identity and vocation. The true Ordo Amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan. That is, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all, without exception. Francis warned against deploying an ideological criterion that distorts social life and imposes the will of the strongest as the criterion of truth. He went on to urge the bishops in the United States to continue working closely with migrants and refugees, proclaiming Jesus Christ and promoting fundamental human rights. God will richly reward all that you do for the protection and defense of those who are considered less valuable, less important, or less human, he added. Pope Francis then turned his attention to the entire Catholic Church, urging its followers, not to give into narratives that discriminate against and cause unnecessary suffering to our migrant and refugee brothers and sisters. He concluded by calling for all of us to work towards a society that is more fraternal, inclusive, and respectful of the dignity of all. In other words, we need to build a world where MAGA is not the law of the land. Please like and share.